Hi everyone, this is Molly and welcome back as we take a look at part 4 of the USA natal chart and look at the energies of transiting Pluto. We're going to be talking about the Pluto in Capricorn return that's happening in the USA chart when Pluto gets to 27 degrees of Capricorn. And in this video, we're going to look at what has transpired in the past few hundred years as transiting Pluto has interacted with natal Pluto. And we're going to look at what those themes have been, what has shown up, how the country has evolved and transpired, and give us perhaps some insights into what is to come, because this Capricorn energy is very strong right now. We're already in it, but the Pluto return happens in 2022 and 2023. Now, it's interesting to note that the natal Pluto in this chart is opposing Mercury in Cancer at 24 degrees of retrograde. And this means that every time transiting Pluto interacts with natal Pluto, it's also going to be interacting with the natal Mercury. And so natal Mercury is communications, information, what is shared, what is said. It is the mainstream media. It is newspapers and magazines and public relations. But in Cancer, it's the feelings it evokes, what comes up around the themes, the Cancer themes of the homeland, safety, families, what it means to be a patriot or to be patriotic. It is about defense and protection. So these themes are going to be triggered. And in fact, they already are, because transiting Pluto at 24 degrees of Capricorn is happening throughout 2020. So we are experiencing transiting Pluto opposing this natal Mercury now, the challenging or even being suspicious of information, what doesn't feel right, what's going on behind the scenes, what's really being said. This Mercury in Cancer tends to walk sideways. So it's an interesting energy, and yet one more layer here to the overall experience of energies. So to begin, this Pluto energy is about regeneration, transformation, a metamorphosis. It shows destruction and creation. It involves power dynamics and control. And in Capricorn, it relates to the Capricornian structures of government, politics, big business, how things are set up to be organized, how we administrate them, who's in charge, how they run the show, authority, responsibility, and everything that comes along with that. Pluto digs in to get into the secrets and hidden knowledge. It's about revelations of that information as well. And it's how life changes permanently with any type of Plutonic energy. And this is true in all the ways that Pluto works with us individually and collectively. So let's start the journey here where Pluto was here at 27 degrees of Capricorn, 1775 to 1777. And this was when the American Revolution was underway, and there were many battles throughout the years. It was a very long-standing war, known as the American War of Independence. George Washington was Army commander. There's also the second voyage of Captain Cook. You can always go deeper into the history here if that's something you fancy or you want to do. I just want to paint a picture about how this was a time when the United States was really being created. It was establishing a national structure, and it was about how do you create a country that also kept growing, because there were many new states that were being developed and organized into the framework of the United States. However, very, very important to note that the destruction associated with Pluto would have been the destruction of the native tribes, native peoples, native lands, those who were here first, those who were essentially on the land before it was organized, into what is known as the United States. Now, the other thing that's important here is that slavery was legal in the U.S., and that, of course, is a very big thing to consider and be aware of. The other thing that I found while doing this research, and you can verify this with other sources if you wish. I'm going to put this on your screen. But this was also founded, supposedly this organization was founded at this same time. And I'm not saying the word because sometimes it gets censored, but take that and run with it, right? And how that has been, I was like, really, that is a very interesting coincidence, or something to just be aware of around the cycles of energies that we're going to be looking at here. So when transiting Pluto moves along, it moves to essentially keep checking in with the natal planet. And in these videos, I'm only looking at the squares, oppositions, and conjunction. You can always go deeper, you can go into more, you can look at the trines or the sextiles, but I'm just looking at the squares first. And so as transiting Pluto moved ahead, it got to 27 degrees of Aries, 1849 to 1850. And this 27 degrees of Aries was the first square, okay? And it would have been, it's called an opening square, meaning it's like the energy is opening up. It gets to this square at 27 degrees of Aries, and then this Pluto challenges what the natal Pluto established. And so the Aries energy is about beginnings, pioneers, explorers, leadership, a new era, war, fire, anger, aggression. And how I see this is that this was a time of the individual and that pioneering spirit challenging the power structures by individuals. And one of the most beautiful examples, I think, is the work of Harriet Tubman as a conductor of the Underground Railroad. This was a time when, yes, slavery was still legal. And a very interesting development happened in 1850. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which was highly controversial, was about how escaped slaves must be returned to their masters, including in the free states. And this is an example of the Aries freedom, escaped slaves being returned to their masters. So a very illustrative way of how this energy showed up in the US. The other things that happened at this time were the beginnings of the steamboat service, where steamboat service begins from the West Coast to the East Coast. The Pennsylvania Railroad began, the California Gold Rush, the Scarlet Letter was published. So definitely some themes showing up here, but essentially it was this Aries independent spirit challenging those in control and those who held the power. And remember, this will also relate to the natal Mercury in Cancer up here, and how this Aries energy then challenged what these Mercury in Cancer themes of feeling safe, where's home, and information that was communicated to the masses. So now we travel from 1849, 1850, Pluto transits around. Yes, it's going to conjunct all these planets as it traveled through Gemini and through Cancer. So again, you're welcome to do a deep dive into that if you'd like. But what I wanted to look at was this opposition. When transiting Pluto got to 27 degrees of Cancer, 1835 to 37, obviously it just made that conjunction to natal Mercury at 24 of Cancer. And this was a time of the Great Depression in the 30s. And it was affecting the people and all these mercurial, everyday energies, everyday habits. In fact, there was an iconic photo called Migrant Mother that was popular between 1935 and 1937. And it relates to the Dust Bowl and the migrant populations moving to find a new life, a better life. So during this time, before World War II, the Cancer energies were really stirring up our definitions of the homeland, feeling safe, protection, families and children, borders and boundaries. And it also can be the energy of shutting down, because that Cancer energy wants to be in full protective mode. It retracts. And this was actually a time on the national scene when the USA did not want to interfere in European matters. There was too much happening in the homeland. And of course, it's FDR's New Deal was underway to rebuild and repair the country during the Great Depression. There was the Dust Bowl. There's a Social Security Act, a wonderful example of Cancer energy. Security, Social Security Act came about during this Pluto in Cancer time. There was a lot of isolationism. Again, the U.S. avoiding global agreements, focusing on national concerns, focusing on the homeland. And I found something really interesting, too, about how in 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act started because hemp was cheaper than paper pulp to create. And I found that to be really fascinating because obviously big business stepped in and said, well, no, we want to make more money, with paper than with hemp. But that's when the Marijuana Tax Act started. And you look at what's happening in the USA now with the revitalizing marijuana hemp industry. So I thought that was worth noting. The other thing to note is that in 1937, there was a recession, big unemployment. And I also thought it interesting that the Grand Coulee Dam was built, and the Hoover Dam was completed. And so the dams being related to even like this Cancer energy of holding back water, holding back energy. There was also in 1937 the Hindenburg disaster, and Amelia Earhart disappeared. So an interesting time with this transiting Pluto opposing natal Pluto, which is a challenge. It's a testing. It's a turning point at a very deep level. It's a pivotal level. And it's looking at, well, how is this holding up? And do we have what we need to take care of the people and their needs and everything that is essential to daily life, to families, to children, etc. So the 1930s were pivotal. And then, of course, World War II started not too long after this transit. So now let's move ahead, and we're going to see how this transiting Pluto then moves over here and gets to 27 degrees of Libra. And this happened in the early 80s, 1982 to 1983, and it created a square to this natal Pluto, and this is called the closing square, where the energy is closing a full cycle. Again, it's testing, it's challenging, and it's bringing up the Libra energy. So it's testing relationships, contracts, agreements, accords, cooperation. And remember, it's also interacting with this Mercury. So it's also about the communications, formal talks, diplomacy, all of that. And in the early 1980s, we had a recession and Reaganomics. And so the desire, the balance and fair, the talking it out, let's settle a deal. And so Reagan did settle a deal, the Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act, TEFRA. The Reaganomics were big with tax reductions and tax changes, trying to be mindful of the people and what was fair. In Lebanon, there's a Lebanese civil war where American peacekeeping forces showed up. There was a U.S. invasion of Grenada. There was also the Soviet Union boycotted the Olympics in 1984. That was in LA, those LA Olympics. You probably remember this. And then other things that transpired was that the U.S. Bell system, which was AT&T, was broken up, early 80s. And there's just a lot here that was testing the U.S. that played out into the mid-80s. Okay, so this was a pivotal time in international relations and establishment of who the U.S. was going to be in the world and how they're going to interact with others. So this energy then continued on. And here we are now approaching the Pluto in Capricorn return, which is when Pluto will get to 27 degrees of Capricorn. And these are the dates. February, July, and December 2022. January, September, October 2023. 2 full years of a Pluto return. This is long time. 2 years, but intense during these 2 years. And this is when reforming the country happens, because Pluto first destroys, it deconstructs, renovates, what is no longer an energetic fit, what is no longer right, what is no longer needed. We've already been living through that in 2020 because of transiting Saturn conjunct this Pluto, checking in, giving a reality check, showing the framework, the structures, what doesn't work. So it's going to really bring up government structures, federal, state, county, city, regional, all of it. What works, what doesn't work. The electoral system, the political voting system, everything that the country was built on is being challenged. And it's also asking that how are individuals with the authority roles here being held accountable within the system for their choices and actions. And we've already seen this playing out with CEOs retiring and people not being reelected and some really big turnover energies that are going to continue throughout these years. And the other very notable development that's happening here is that at the same time that the Pluto return is happening, there is also Saturn conjunct the moon in Aquarius. And so this is a very big deal because the moon is the people. It's us. The moon is our daily lives. It is how we go about our daily lives. It is the energies of the collective. Saturn sitting here is changing the daily life permanently. Saturn is the ruler of Pluto and Capricorn. When Saturn enters Aquarius and stays there, December 2020, it's going to be bringing in a reality check that hits the people in the year, we have it here, February 2023. February 2023. Okay, it's hard to write, sorry. So, this is when all the changes out there come home. American life changes permanently, and that means it's going to require new innovation, which is the Aquarius energy of technology, computer, science, engineering, futuristic things, aviation, space. I think that when we put this in context of COVID, we're going to see a lot of things shutting down. I would guess arenas, stadiums, places where collective energies gather, team sports, group activities, what's going to happen with schools, I know that all of this has come up in 2020, but there's something about 2023 that's a significant turning point and is going to require new ways of living our daily life. Because everything that's happening in the bigger world, it hits here. It hits the American way of life. And the Saturn energy is always the reality check. Now, the last time Saturn was here was in the early 1990s, 1991. It does take Saturn about 28, 30 years to go all around the wheel. At that time in the early 90s, we had Operation Desert Storm. We had the Space Shuttle program, Space Shuttle Columbia, Space Shuttle Atlantis. The Hubble Space Telescope was launched. Gene therapy began on a human patient. So these new things coming about in the Aquarian areas of life. But because this energy is already happening, and this is the biggest deal, it's when it hits the people in 2023. And again, I think there's shutdowns. Because Saturn shuts down what no longer works. And it gives a reassessment. So 2022 is when Pluto first gets to 27 degrees of Capricorn. And then it's really 2023 that the permanent changes show up, and that we're really at a place of considering what's next, what's needed, what's essential, and where we go from here. So, of course, there's many ways these things can play out. And there's many wonderful developments that can happen too. But these are very heavy transits coinciding at the same time, which I feel shows us this is something bigger. This is a divine spiritual development. There's something happening here to evolve the U.S. as a country and to mature it, I would say as well, because all of the Cancer energies can be matured through Capricorn. So we shall see, won't we, how this all plays out and what comes up. But keep in mind, it's not only a Pluto return, which is in and of itself a huge deal, but it's the Saturn conjunct the moon. It's how it affects Americans in a very real way, and how it changes our lives permanently. So I hope this has given you some interesting food for thought, as well as anything that can help with your next steps, preparations, what you want to do, if there's something that you want to have in place or that you want to pull together, by 2023. That might be a good timeline or something to focus on, knowing that the country is changing permanently. And of course, there's many ways it can unfold. There's many potentials and possibilities, but this gives you an idea of the overall theme, the seriousness of it, that it is a big deal, and that yet we travel with our power, and we are powerful as we are regenerating, transforming, and also becoming individually and collectively a new energy in the world. So thank you for joining me. I hope this has been an informative video for you, and I'll be back soon with another video for you here on my YouTube channel. Thank you for joining me.